Hi, Jack. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm happy to chat with you always, and it's going to be great to hear your story today. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I don't get too many invitations to chat, so this is a wonderful opportunity.
Awesome. Well, you are one phenomenal educator. I've been looking over your story and your kind of accomplishments, if I may be so bold to say. And you've obviously taught all over the world. You've started schools. You started, I think, back in biology and teaching biology. So, could you give our audience today kind of a bird's eye view of some of the highlights of your journey as an educator?
Well, for sure, it has been a journey. This is actually my 50th year in this journey, and I started out as you said, a biology teacher, and I never ever thought I would be where I'm at today. I never thought I would move up the ranks from being a teacher into an administration, and I moved up through the ranks. I stayed at one school district for 34 years. I helped turn it around, and we became a very distinctive school district in our state. I have also been able to move from public school to private school, and I've actually been a headmaster at private school, and I helped to resurrect that school's program, and I really learned a lot from private to public. And then I've actually been able to get into international education, which is even a whole different world, and I've been able to travel much more extensively than I ever thought I would. And that has opened up opportunities, and I've been able to speak to teachers and students from Germany to Korea to just recently Guatemala. I visited schools in Australia. I visited schools in South Africa. I've been to China and visited schools. I've actually, while I was at the private school, we actually created a school campus in China. So I've had lots of experiences. I worked with all levels from boards to students. I am just basically, if you need to make who I am just an old teacher. I just have been around a long time. But I've had tons of experiences, and that is my strength, the fact that I've had this wide range of opportunities to interact in the field of education.
Well, that's phenomenal. Wow, you've been literally all over the world. And so tell us a little bit more about that. Was that to work with ESL students? Was it to start schools? What brought you to travel the globe in the hopes of spreading education?
Initially, my first travels were to start schools, build collaborations, and actually recruit students. Because we were recruiting students to the private school I was running because international students helped us with our budget. So that was really the start of it. Then after that, connected up more curriculum-wise. We were providing curriculum to those schools in the other countries. We were providing teacher expertise, and actually we were developing teacher training programs. So there was lots of different reasons that we visited, and I visited in particular. But the simplest reason was I was building a relationship. You cannot work with those schools without building a relationship. And that's something we as Americans sometimes forget because we have this microwave mentality. But it's about visiting, talking, getting to know them, understand their culture, understand their customs. And so it was just a process. And basically, I learned as I went.
Well, I love that you bring out relationships because I think they're so important, not just for international, but even here at home. And we tend to neglect those a lot. Everybody functions as their own thing, school boards and parents and teachers, and what to actually create change for our kids today in the field of education and give them that education they deserve. We have to build those relationships. So definitely a lot of experience there that I'm sure helps you here at home as well. Let's get a little bit deeper, though. I would love to hear from you as the expert educator here. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on how relationships, or maybe other things that you've learned along the way, how does that play into your beliefs on instruction and pedagogy in the classroom?
Well, it's really so simple. It's almost painful. It's so simple. Schools are built on relationships. Relationships, exist between the teacher and the student. That's where the magic happens. Relationship exists between the teachers, the parents, and their leadership. Relationships exist with school board members and how they relate to the stakeholders of their school. It's all about relationships. Sometimes we make this business, and we use that fancy word pedagogy, such a neat word. But basically, it's just how we do business. And sometimes we try to do business without the relationships, and we do it from a power perspective. You're my employee, I'm your employer. In education, it isn't about that. Because if I would ask you, Catherine, to name me your most favorite people that you remember in your school days, it will always be someone who you've had a relationship with that you perceived as being important to you. You don't remember that this person was the best teacher ever and made me learn the quadratic equation or something. You remember that teacher because of their relationship. And schools need to work that way. And I can tell you, as principal, when I was principal of a building, I worked at developing relationships with the students so that they would talk to me and we could interact. And they didn't see me as this heavy-handed guy who was the boss. But they knew I was, but the relationship is more important. So relationships are critical at all levels, and I think sometimes that requires listening to one another. And, that doesn't happen much nowadays. We have a tendency to want to tell everybody something instead of listening.
Yeah, I think that's why having conversations like we're having today are so important. And when I look back in my own experiences for teachers and bosses, it was always those that took the time to listen and build that camaraderie. And then once they listen, then the student or me as a student or an employee was more apt to listen back, right? It wasn't that I wouldn't listen to begin with, but once I had been listened to, I definitely enjoyed listening a lot more, right? Like you're just more inclined to want to learn if the person that's teaching you cares about you and is willing to take the time to get to know you as a human being.
But we sometimes think that we can force somebody to do something. It goes back to the old adage, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I can make a student sit in a seat quietly, but I can't make them learn. Learning is a choice. And the sooner we accept that, the better our schools would be.
Well, your comment makes me think of a recent video that was released on the NWEF YouTube channel, and it was a Team Reacts video. And basically, it was a reaction to an article where they talked about how students, when they weren't being compliant in certain regions, the doctors admitted to the New York Times that they put them on pills. They put them on ADHD medication to make them compliant. And the doctors admitted that the kid didn't actually need that, but they wanted, a student that sat quietly in a chair instead of taking the time to maybe hire enough teachers or figure out what was actually going on in the kids' home lives. And instead they were just like, we'll make you compliant. So while the majority of teachers may not paddle anymore, or the majority of administrations allow that to happen, unfortunately, we still have that struggle to make someone compliant without actually having a conversation or worry about learning. And it's so sad.
Right. We have become so conscious with time. I don't have time. You'll hear that expression as a teacher. I don't have time to deal with Jack. I don't have time to deal with Mary. So I have to move forward. I have to cover material. Well, right there, in that response, you're hearing that the most important person in there is the kid, and the kid is being held less important than the content or the time schedule or whatever. Time is something we have to look at in education differently, and how we package it and how we use it and how we relate to kids. Because I hate to say it, Catherine, but schools haven't changed much in 100 years.
No, they really haven't. And that dovetails perfectly into my next question for you, because we do have, on the one hand, a society that's obsessed with time, and we have teachers that are usually have too many kids in a classroom, understaffing issues. And then on the other hand, you may have administration that is asking them to do more paperwork than they've ever had to do before, or That's the main pushback for academic transparency, is that teachers say it requires even more of their time to upload lessons, and that's a new requirement. So regardless of how you look at it, to a certain extent, teachers are expected to do a lot more than maybe they were in the past in some situations, as far as administrative workload goes, paperwork workload goes, more kids. Sometimes even they're relied on to take part in, mental health. We want our teachers to be equipped to take care of that now that we have a mental health crisis on our hands. So how do you, as a teacher, manage all of that and still give the student everything that they deserve?
Well, that's why teaching is probably one of the hardest professions you can be in, because of the extraneous demands. I'll tell you the reason I left the classroom early on was I loved the kids. I loved teaching. I loved doing things with them. I was a biologist, so we could do a lot of neat stuff. But I disliked all the peripheral stuff that you had to do. I had to do bathroom patrol. I had to do lunch duty. I had to do study hall. And so you start listing all the have to do things. All those things dealt with me not really relating to the kids anymore in a functional way. They become control things. And the institution that closely matches schools is a prison. Prisons and schools, if you would study their nature, are very similar. You get a captive audience, and a captive space. So a teacher really has to struggle, and they really have to become masters of their subject and also masters in how to present their subject. And with technology, there is some helps out there, but our teachers, again, if you look at how technology was put into most schools, they bought the technology, but they never trained the teachers how to use it. And so what happens is, so you need to learn it on your own time. Well, when are you going to get that time to learn? And so it becomes very haphazard. It becomes very haphazardly implemented. And so even though the teachers have skills, right now, I would have loved to have what's out there online when I was teaching, because all I had was a piece of white chalk and a blackboard. That would have been a phenomenal thing. But again, it takes time. And so oftentimes in education, we do things in a hurried fashion just to get the check mark. Every kid has a Chromebook. Well, if the teacher doesn't know how to really maximize that effect, there is no gain in it. Actually, there's a loss. And I think if you look at how schools implement things, instead of helping teachers and being a helpmate, they become more of just putting more weight on top of them. And so, teachers eventually get frustrated, and they hear administrators, and they say, it's just the same old thing, just packaged differently. It's the same. It doesn't change. And so to really get at what you're talking about, you really have to be purposeful in your planning, and you have to work with teachers and bring them along that process. And it takes time. But teaching is tough. Now, the other reason it is tough is kids nowadays are different than the kids I taught. The kids I taught really were pretty easy to teach. But the kids nowadays have so many other issues that you really have to be on top of your game if you're going to try to meet every child's need. And that is a challenge. And the best teachers that do that, I will always say, are your elementary teachers. Because if you talk to an elementary teacher, they know every individual child, and they have a sort of a plan for every individual child. They often have study stations that each child goes to. And so it isn't a one-size-fits-all. But as you move up the gradation from elementary to secondary, it becomes more of an assembly line, and I have this content to teach, and the kids become invisible. And that's why you see so many problems in the middle and high, because of that. If we could take high school teachers and middle school teachers and get them to teach like elementary teachers and apply those skills, if they could use those skills, it would change the nature of education immensely.
Well, I love that you brought that out, because I've met many elementary school teachers, and the ones that stay elementary school teachers, And even the ones that begin, they seem like they are the most passionate typically, not always, but the most passionate typically. And that may be because there's less required content they have to give. I don't know. I've never been an elementary school teacher. I have tutored elementary, and it seemed that way to me as I helped them with their homework. But anyway, but getting back to what you said, I know you had mentioned earlier when you were kind of giving your background that you have helped turn some districts and some schools around. So can you kind of give specific examples or maybe a story or two of where you were able to implement some of these strategies and it have remaining fruit?
I can give you the best example when I took over this little private school. As I started working with the teachers, I found out the teachers had never had in-service training for years, like 10, 15 years. And so it was just always assumed that you come and you teach. And so the first thing I did was we implemented a plan of what we needed to change first to help the teachers teach better. And we focused our efforts actually more in the middle school and elementary level because you have to build the program up as it comes up. So we started instituting some training, focus training. And the other thing was in schools, when we do give training, we have a tendency to give it to everybody, which means if this is the year of technology, you all get the same stuff. Well, if you're going to individualize kids' education, you have to individualize faculty's education. So we put in a professional development plan in such a way that every teacher had to develop their own professional development plan. These are the 3 goals that I want to accomplish this year for me. And typically one of those 3 was one of my goals that I wanted to accomplish for the building. So we would share a common goal. But what happened was then by differentiating how I was teaching teachers, I was meeting teachers' needs, and all of a sudden performance started to increase because it became productive, it became valuable. It wasn't just a waste of time. It wasn't just something we do. It wasn't just, as my book would have said, a habit that we do. So that was important. And the other thing was we started developing what I called in the private school was easy, a K-12 mentality. We weren't different units, we were together, and everything had to flow from kindergarten to 12th grade. And it was amazing when you started bringing people together to talk about things that we needed to overcome in the building operation, how it pulled us together. Even in a building, when you have K-12, it's almost like different worlds. Elementary is one world, middle is one world, high school is one world. Science teachers have a whole different way of thinking than English teachers and all that stuff. Well, we had to become very similar. So one of the things that we used to do is every year we would pick a book to read. And we would all read that book. That meant board members, the leadership team, the teachers, and then we would have discussions on it. Now, in the private sector, it was amazing. The books I chose were not religious books. They were books that actually I had to teach them that there was a lot of religion in some of these simple books that you read, like Who Moved My Cheese, Fred the Mailman. I know those are books you don't even hear of. But simple things that talked about service and all the things that a faith-based school should be about. And it was amazing how they were able to make that connection. Probably one of the funnest is that such a good word, the funnest word, was Fish. We read Fish. You ever read about Fish? It was about the people who work at the Pike's Fish Market in Seattle. And it was phenomenal. But it also brought lessons. So they started to see how everything is woven together. In the private world, particularly the faith-based private world, they sort of think they are an entity to themselves and they don't see how they fit in. And it's almost like the kids are coming to you and you have a dome over your school and you're there to protect them. And there's some truth to that, even in the public school. But what happens when they graduate, they have to walk out underneath that dome and go out into the real world. And that was one of the pieces that I was trying to get them to understand, that we had to prepare these kids to walk into the real world, into the world that they're going to see. Because the world that was created by the school and its culture wasn't real. It was safe when you were there, but you're not going to always be there. So all those things tie together. But again, it goes back to good communication, being willing to listen, and growing it piece by piece. It isn't a microwave thing. It took years. I was at that little private school for 8 years, and I was just starting to make a difference. I was at the public school for 34 years. I was just starting to make a difference. Well, we were making pretty big differences. But the point being is it's a time investment. You don't do this overnight. So what makes Noah Webster so important to me is school board members, come and go. I know one guy, I had breakfast with him this past week, one of my buddies who was a former superintendent, and he said his first year he was superintendent, he had 18 different board members. The board changed that much. And that happens in some districts in Pennsylvania. So how do you get continuity of leadership? And then in Pennsylvania, superintendents, particularly if you're an urban superintendent, your life expectancy is just about 3 years. So if you're changing your top administrator every 3 years, in Arizona is worse, I think it's 2 point something, how do you get any continuity of growth? So you need to maintain boards, you need to maintain your leadership, and you need to maintain that relationship so things eventually filter down to the kids. It's sort of like a kid being in a home where the mom and dad are not stable. You know what happens. Well, the same thing happens in schools, except it just looks a little bit different.
Well, that's a phenomenal example that I think really brings it to light, and that is continuity. And we've have so many studies that show that children do better with stability, with routine, with continuity. And so, of course, that would apply to administrations of schools. And just from working a little bit in that field, I worked at a university, but, when we could have a leader that had been in the same position for a really long time, sometimes there were some major changes that could occur, and they occurred slowly. And looking back, I was like, wow, after 5 years, we've really made an impact in that area. Not to say that short-term leadership changes can't accomplish big things. I mean, I saw that happen as well, but there was something about that stability that really made a difference. Let's go ahead and talk about some of your favorite resources that you might want to share with our listeners. Are there, you mentioned some books that you had your school read. Are there practical things that people could listen to or read that might help them on this journey if they want to explore more of how to slowly but make a mighty change in their environment?
Yeah, I mean, my insight to that is when I was in the public school, believe this or not, we read at least 1 or 2 books every year with our faculty and also our school board. The first book I ever took to the school board, and I was in charge of training them, now this is a public school, was Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun. I chose that book because the title was so catchy. Because you hear of Attila the Hun, you think that he's out there ravaging and axing people and stuff, but it was a whole lot different than that. And so every year we would read all kinds of different books. So we even read, and this was probably our hardest year, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, about his survival in a concentration camp. But that was an important read. So we read some like simple books like Who Moved My Cheese. That was a very simple book we used, but it was a great book to teach about leadership. We read some books written by a guy by the name of Collins, Good to Great, which was a really pretty heavy-duty book about leadership and about leadership, level 5 leaders and so forth, talks about how organizations develop momentum. And so we use those terms. But what really, we also read a book called The Great Wing, which was about geese, which was phenomenal. My teachers, because I was a biologist, they said, we're not going to read about another animal this year, are we? Because I generally picked books that had some animal theme. But the Great Wing was phenomenal because it was the concept that, geese are really independent individuals. And the only time that they do anything together is during migration. So we had the theme in our district as density. If all of us would choose to do one thing together, the power of it would be phenomenal. So we started talking about the things we could be doing together. And so that was important. We had a theme one year. We read a book that we called The Big Rocks. What were the important things that we should be doing, and what are they? What are those important things? Again, that was to simplify what we were doing. Just as you were talking about overwhelming teachers, well, we were overwhelming the district with all these mandates and things that we didn't really have control of. So personally, I spent a lot of time just reading on the internet. It's amazing what you can find. You can search. There's all kinds of topics that you can read. You can join professional organizations. When I was in the business, of course, I belonged to all the professional organizations that I could in administration, ACSD or ASCD. I forget which one it is, but the curriculum development people. It's always good to read what they're talking about. So there isn't any lack of reading, but again, you need, when you read, it's always better if you have someone you can share with and bounce ideas and so forth, because whatever I might have accumulated in my years, if I can't get it out and share it with people, it's really lost. It's locked in here. So I really believe that as you read articles, and I had a friend, a very good friend, he and I worked together the past 42 years, and we would write each other notes about things we were reading in books. And if you would come to my house, you would see I have hundreds of books on different topics. On leadership, we read one called Heroic Leadership, which was a phenomenal book about how the early Jesuits went and immigrated, and they actually carried their things, and how they led. So you can never read too much. You can never share too much. I would recommend. I know there are several sites that you can join where you can join a chat room where you swap ideas. I think that is powerful. I think probably one of the most powerful things for me was when I was able to get out of my niche of where I live and travel and meet different people. It's amazing what you learn as you travel and as you meet people that have similar jobs as you, but they come from a different area. Like when we went to Germany, I mean, I learned tons of things. And when I go to South Korea, I learn from the people. So I think the issue is you need to be a lifetime learner. And if you haven't embraced being a lifetime learner, I don't have time or I can't. There is no excuse with the technology nowadays. You can carry your Kindle, you can carry your phone. I'm not good at either one of them because I don't like that kind of stuff. I like to hold a book. So if you see yourself that you have reached your pinnacle and you have nothing more to learn, then you shouldn't be in the business. And that would be my blunt answer to you. So there's all kinds of opportunities out there. You just have to reach out. And sometimes, I read a lot of autobiographies about people. You read about Abraham Lincoln. It's amazing what you learn. You read about George Patton or Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Churchill. It's amazing what you learn about them that you learns about leadership. And I'm really big in my mind. I really enjoy reading quotes. Because I think quotes and just their simplistic things can really give messages. For instance, Nelson Mandela, one of the ones that just jumped on my mind. If you want to change the world, you change it through education. So all that stuff, as you get older like me, accumulates, and you sort of see the connections between all of it. And I think it's important for these young administrators to be learning that kinds of thing, these young teachers to be learning that kinds of things, and look at curriculum as being multifaceted and not just one thing. I mean, biology, since I've been in it so many years, it rubs shoulders with so many other disciplines. When I started out, I was pretty narrow-minded. You either studied animals or you studied plants. Well, there's a whole lot more to it than that. But I think that's what we sometimes get into, and we become very myopic, and we have to really widen our view instead of narrowing our view. That's a long answer for a simple question.